Chad asked me a while back, he said, would you mind speaking on this particular Sunday? And I was pretty hesitant, actually. I said, well, that's something I used to do a while ago, like many years ago. And then I got thinking about it, and I thought, well, he needs help. And I said, well, I'll just give my testimony then. I'll just share my testimony, which is kind of an easy thing because you're just telling your story. But it's not so easy because you got to do it if you heard my story, we could be here for a week. We don't want that. 15 minutes maybe, but a week is a long time. And I thought, well, okay, I'll do that. And as I got thinking about it, I realized that even back in the day, I never considered the pulpit, if this is our pulpit or a regular pulpit, I never considered it anything less than sacred. This is not public speaking. I'm not here to wow you with public speaking prowess. I'm going to tell you a story, and my belief is that God takes what we say and he uses it in a way that's usable to somebody. It might just be one person here that gets something out of what I say. It might be something halfway across the world or someone halfway across the world. We don't know that. So I just want you to know I'm not here for a public speaking contest. And I'm just going to try to keep it nice and short to give you a little bit of my life. But then it wasn't quite enough that it was about my life. It can't be just about me. It has to be something that applies to you. So out of my story, I came up with two different things that I think are truths for everybody. And hopefully you can take them home. And hopefully if you're listening, again, halfway across the world, you can take these principles home or these truths home. So my first 5 years of life were pretty simple, pretty average. Dad worked at a sales job. Mom was at home. There's 5 kids, and that part might not have been average, but we had a nice little brick bungalow and then went to a nice church. Everything was kind of the same as all our neighbors and that kind of thing. But then my father got wind of a church closing in a little town called Wooler. I'm not quite sure how he found out about this, but he did. And God began to speak to his heart about how the last thing this country needs is the church doors closing. And so long story short, he ended up quitting his job and moving his family of 5 kids, mom and himself, to Wooler to take up being the pastor of this little church. He had to go to Bible college, and he had to do his training and all that kind of stuff. But this house that we moved, maybe more the ladies here than the men might appreciate this part of it. I don't know. I hope that's not, I'll probably get in trouble for some kind of statement there, but at any rate, this house had no indoor plumbing. This house had a 12-inch difference from one corner to the other in one room. That's how bad the floors were. My mother used to huddle us all together in the wintertime in the kitchen because when she was cooking, that's when the heat would be in the house, and the rest of the house would freeze. So that's how we started in this thing called ministry. But Dad was called to this thing, and so he went. We didn't have a choice. we went with him, obviously. Now, the interesting thing, so Dad starts this church. There's 2 ladies in this church. The congregation consisted of 2 elderly ladies. That was all that was left. My sisters, however, the summer of that year, were playing with a friend, and they started a grass fire and burnt the church down. That's how we started. Now, from the church burning down, the news went everywhere about this church burning down. And Dad, being a carpenter, was he was the general contractor, and he started building a new church on the old foundation. But he inscripted the skill sets of a lot of neighbors and people in the Wooler area who had skills as, pouring cement or carpenters or plumbers, whatever it took. And so I know it's not really a good ministry mode to follow, but if you want your church to grow, burn it down. It'll work. We went from about 3 people to 60 in a year because people now knew about it, and you get to go back and forth, and the walls came down, excuse the pun, in the community, because the church sometimes builds up walls between it and its surrounding community. And that's been a plight of the church probably from the beginning, is that we get our safe little haven and we try to build it from the inside out. It's not the way it works. You got to go outside. At any rate, that's kind of how we started. And then about 3 years after that, my father again felt this urge to do something different again. And so if the first thing wasn't tough enough, he just upped the ante a little bit. He realized that there was a kind of a move of God coming through Canada, and mostly out west. There, in the early 70s, there was a real revival. God was sweeping across the prairies, as they said. And my father he got thinking, well, when that's all said and done and the hoopla is sort of died down a bit, who's going to follow up with these people? Who's going to go out and follow up? And so we started singing a little bit as a family, little guitar. And then I learned to play drums when I was like 10. My mother played the bass. And my sister would play the piano, and we would go and sing in little places, and it started to grow and grow and grow. And he asked the church, he said, listen, this is a real ministry that's happening. This is something that's actually taking place, and people are wanting the gospel through music. Can I take 1 month or 1 Sunday a month off from my duties as pastor of this church so that I can go do this? And the church, this is the ironic thing, the church board, which he grew, which he developed, said, no, you can't. They gave him an ultimatum. You either sing or you pastor. Just don't give Edwards ultimatums. It's a really, I don't know if it was as much that or it was this pull from God to say, you got to go on the road. So when I was around 12, somewhere in there, 10, 12, Dad quit his job as a pastor, and he took the family on the road full time. We got into a bus. We would get out of school whenever the kids get out of school. And I remember specifically walking out the doors of the school on the last day of school, right onto the bus. And that night we would be playing somewhere. And we would play every night, all summer long, often more than once a day, until about a week before school started again in September. Which gave us time to get supplies and stuff. And we would sing all summer long. So we'd go east, we'd go west. And that's how we were raised. That was my upbringing. It's a little strange. It's a little different than most of you had, but it was, it was awesome. We had some great stories to tell. But here's the thing. God called my father to do this ministry. And the promise was that I wouldn't leave you or forsake you. That's the promise from God's word for anybody. That's his promise to us. He won't leave us or forsake us. And sometimes things get really tough and things get bad, but it doesn't mean that God's not there. It means that he's close, but this is a bad time. This is a tough time. We're going to get through this. And so, sure, it seemed glamorous. Oh, you're in a motorhome or you're in a bus, and you're traveling the country, and you're singing every night. That did a couple of things. It took us away from that normal upbringing that you may have experienced. I mean, things like hockey and Little League and all those things that boys love to do when they're growing up. I never got that. I would get into a sport a few years later, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but my upbringing was on stage playing, listening to sermons. At one Sunday, we did 5 shows. It was 5 concerts from sunrise, 7 o'clock morning service, right on through to 7 o'clock night service. And that's what we did. There were people that were threatening my parents to call Children's Aid. There were people who were trying to shut us down and saying, you're making your kids work. People trying to shut us down and saying it's cruel to do this to children. Can you imagine? All it really taught us was how to deal with people, how to work together, how to be okay when things aren't okay. I mean, those are pretty good things to have to learn as a kid. And so this is what we did. Now, God said, I'll take care of you. And this is one of the stories I'm going to share with you. It didn't mean that things were always good. It meant that I remember specifically a time going through the East Coast. And I remember it because I was starving. I was so hungry. I was just a kid anyway, so kids are always hungry. But this time I was really hungry. And my parents, I can remember hearing them pray as they're driving down the road. Now, this didn't happen a lot. Long story short, that marriage ended up falling apart years later, and it was because it wasn't a good marriage. There weren't very many moments like the one I'm about to tell you, but it was a good moment that's locked in my head. And it was them praying together and saying, God, you called us on the road. You said that you would look after us. You promised to look after our family if we did this. We're hungry. It's that simple. We're hungry. And we got no money. We would live off of what they called love offerings. How many are familiar with the term love offering? Right. In our case, it was a lot more love than offering, usually. And in this case, it had gotten to the place where they're, okay, no money, no food. So they prayed. I remember them praying. I had the vision of this in my head as a kid, and them holding hands praying about this. And then down the road, there's this lady that leans out, and she's waving. She's waving at us as she goes the other way in a taxi. And so my dad waves back and thinks, boy, they're friendly around here. You know, he keeps driving. The same lady, the same taxi comes by about 5 minutes later, and this time she's got both hands out the window and saying, stop, stop. And so we thought, now we got a problem. I thought, what more can go on with this? We pull over. We think maybe, I don't know, something's busted on the thing. She stops. She says, as I saw your bus coming, God spoke to me and said this. Not sure if it's because of food, but this story always gets me. He said, feed that family. We just prayed. How does this lady know that we're praying for food? She's the owner of a restaurant in the town that we're in. God speaks to her heart and says, feed that family. It's interesting. Chad is very good at doing the whole science creation thing. I don't have all that. But you're going to tell me that there's not a God? I tell you what, as a 12-year-old boy, sitting in that restaurant, the first time I ever had my own milkshake, I'm thinking, oh, there's a God. My own burger, my own fries, my own milkshake, and I ain't sharing with anybody. And I'm thinking, this is how God takes care of his kids. We did that for a number of years. And as the kids grew up, the family kind of dispersed and whatnot. But my dad is 88 years old now, and he still tours on his own. He says he goes to old folks' homes because he likes to cheer up the old people. And that's what he does. And we did, so when I was 12 years old, though, we went to Admiral Camp. That was the day that I knelt down at an altar and I gave my heart to the Lord. It was the beginning of a journey. Now, I've had some funny theological things preached at me over the years, but basically your faith journey is a journey. You go up and down, you go left and right. It's a journey, and you're finding your way as you go through life. I wish it was so simple that you could just, boy, at 12 years old, I was saved and I became a Christian, and life was like this straight and narrow path. I have gone left and right a lot, and I've got the scars to prove it. But God has always been faithful. That's the beauty of it. We had ministry. I actually followed my father's footsteps, you might say. Went into ministry, and I was a pastor in Darcy and Admiral, Saskatchewan, then up in Dryden, and then in Peterborough, a number of little spots here and there. But the bottom line was that there's always been this draw to share the love of God, but I always was met with such religion that it just ticked me off. I said, I don't want any part of this. Are you kidding me? You say you love me and you do this, or you say that. You do this to my family. Are you kidding me? The other part of me is that I'm a bit of a fighter sometimes, and I don't really want to be nice to people when I'm in that mood. And that's where God has to work on my heart, because when people are messing with my family, I'll go to war. That's my mindset, right? And so the church, in my mind, became that enemy, because they had done so many things over and over again in the name of whatever. So Chad asked me to speak. I said, really? All right, I'm just going to give my testimony and my story. I won't go into all the details. I hadn't to laugh because I was saying to Maria, I said, well, I'm just going to give my story. And she says to me, how much are you going to say? I won't go into all the dirty details, but here's the thing. Here's the first verse for you to take home with you. You all know it. For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. It's one of those truths, whether you think you're pristine, clean, or whether you think that you are someone that's gone so far that you'll never be able to be comfortable in the presence of God. On either end, the fact is we've all sinned. We've all fallen short. And then the 24th verse, though, says, everyone is justified freely by his grace. The grace of God is extended to everybody the same way that everybody has sinned. Do you understand what I'm saying? We've all messed up, but God's grace, and here's the phrase right from the beginning when Chad asked me to say anything, I thought, God's grace is greater than my failures. God's grace is greater than your failures. There are people who feel that they have done so much, or they've gone too far, or they've broken the heart of God so many times that there's no way back. What I'm here to tell you, and if this is all you get, if you're listening over in Japan somewhere or something, is this: God's grace is greater than your failures. Don't start believing the lie that you've gone too far. It's not true. If you're listening to this guy speak today, it's proof that God's put you in a place to hear this message, that you have not gone too far. God's grace is greater than your failures. For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. But to everyone, we have justification freely through his grace. That is a powerful truth that every person can take a hold of and apply to their own life. I love that. God's gifted us. One of the reasons I thought it was fitting that Keith would come up, I said, do another song. It's pretty obvious. I mean, when people listen, I would say we'd be pretty unanimous in thinking that, where is he? He's over there. Keith has a gift. It's pretty obvious. Did you know, though, that we all have gifts? Did you know that God has, when he was knitting you together, he infused in there certain things about you that he can use for his kingdom? There are certain things about your personality or your brain or the way you think or the way your aptitude for things. God can take that and will use it to his glory. You have something to offer back. And that's really the second part of this whole thing, is not only is God's grace greater than my failures, but he wants me to go do something about it. He wants me to be part of this magic plan. I say magic. I don't get all hyper on me. But just it's like this huge mystical thing. This powerful God has asked little me to do something about it, to be a part of it. I get to be a part of this amazing plan of God by simply using the few things that he may have given me to his glory. There isn't a single person here or out there that hasn't got something that God can't use for his glory. Now think about that for a minute. How important are you? How big are you in God's eyes? That first of all, that he would extend such grace to you. That all the things that we've done that break his heart aren't enough to stop him loving us. And then he says, I'd like you to be a part of the team. I'd like you to do something for me. I have a job for you to do, and I'd like you to do it. Because that's the truth. Marie read this passage from 1 Peter 4:10. And it just basically states that everybody's got a gift. Everybody's got something to encourage each other or to draw people into the fold. This is why we have our gifts. It's to do one of two things. It's to encourage one another or to draw people in to a relationship with Christ. So I listen to Keith sing. I say, what a gift! What a gift! But I can look around. I'll tell you, just setting this up this morning, I think of Patricia's gifts of setting all this stuff up, and I'm thinking, how do I do this? How do I put this together? Maria this morning is saying, let me help you with that. Putting this slide presentation together. People know stuff. They have abilities. This isn't happening just because one guy decided to step up and start talking. This happened because a lot of people are doing a lot of different things so that somebody might hear the message that God's grace is greater than their failures and that he's got something for you to do. He's going to equip you with whatever you need to get the job done. That's pretty cool. I'm going to give you two quick stories. These are two of my favorite stories of part of my travel. Part of my testimony in ministry was being out west. I was in Saskatchewan. And when I was out there, I discovered or had two incidences that happened that I've taken with me everywhere. And I've talked to different people about these two incidences because they're kind of polar opposites, but they say the same thing. And it might encourage you a little bit this morning. My buddy Leroy, farmer, a power lifter he was a guy that trained as a power lifter. Big dude. He's pulling out of the driveway of camp meeting one day. Now camp meeting, you all know what camp meeting is maybe. It's a kind of a week that you take off and you come together as a church and you have services and you eat together and it's a fellowship time. But okay, so Admiral Camp was actually where we were. And he comes out of the driveway and I wave him down and I say, Leroy, you got a flat tire. Your back tire's flat. He stops the car and he looks at it. He goes, oh, man, okay, no, thanks for stopping me. I could feel something. But anyway, so he pops the trunk to get the jack, and the jack's gone. He goes, oh, man, I was fixing the tractor last week, and I forgot to put the jack. I don't have a jack. What am I going to do? So Leroy decides, he gets the back bumper, and he starts to try to lift his car. And but he had hurt his leg in training, so he didn't feel like the weight of the car was good for his knee. Probably not good for anybody's knees, to be honest with you. But he didn't feel that he could lift this anymore with just lifting it up. So he steps back. He's got no jack. He's got a hurt knee. And he thinks and he thinks. And he goes, I got it. I said, I know what I'm going to do. And he gets the little wheel lug thing on, and he takes all the lugs of the tire off. He loosens them all off for me. And he says, now when I lift the car from underneath, you change the tire. Yes, sir. So he slides himself under the car, grabs a hold of the back axle, and you hear him go, and you see the car go up in the air. He bench presses his car so I can change the tire. So I'm changing the tire, and I can hear him under there, and I can hear under the strained voice, I can hear him saying, are you getting it? Are you getting it? I said, yeah, Leroy, I'm getting it. I didn't really have the heart to tell him it was taking so long because I was finding the tire to be a bit heavy. So we got the tire on, put the lugs on, and away he goes. And I always was amazed at this man's power, his strength. That what a gift. You could have 3 of me trying to lift that car, and it wouldn't happen. There's nobody in that area that was going to do that job except for a man with that kind of power. And he did it because he had that gift. Now, Emma was my friend. She was 92 years old, and she did well to lift a teapot. But she did, and every other week she would have me over for dinner. She and her sister lived together. She was blind, and the sister was deaf. But they worked together, and they lived together. She was 92. Her young sister was 72. And we pastored a church there in Swift Current. There were 9 people in this church. And the youngest person was Margaret, who was 72. That was our youth group. We didn't play a lot of football, but that was our youth group. And so every other week we would be in this place, in their home, and they would put out a beautiful meal. They'd clean it up. They would never let us help. And then she'd sit down, and this is what it was all about for Margaret. She'd get to sit down, and she'd get to tell her testimony. And she'd look at you, and she would say, she'd talk about the death of her husband in the 30s and how she had to raise a family on the prairies during the 30s and how she lost a child and different sicknesses. And she'd go through these things. And at the end of it all, she would just say, of course, she'd be weeping by now. She would say, "But isn't God good? He's been faithful all these years." I'm going to tell you something. Of all the classes I've taken in Bible college, of many sermons I've heard of guys that have got their degrees, no one spoke to my heart as well as this 92-year-old woman. Because what you're listening to there is a woman who's been there, done that. And she is telling you that God has been with me. It's good on paper to say God will be with you. But when you're looking in the eyes of a woman who's lived 92 years and has had to go through as many heartbreak as she's done, and then you see the joy in her eyes as she speaks of her Lord and Savior, you know there's something real about this stuff. And I would say to people your strength isn't, none of us were like Leroy, I suppose, but I mean, when the strength of our youth starts to fade, and this happens in churches a lot, seniors sort of get swept aside. I've seen it happen. The church, as a body, needs your wisdom. They need your testimony. They need your words of affirmation. There's been a couple of churches I've been a part of where they have ministries, if you will, where the seniors and the youth group get together once a week or once a month, and they do something together. And I always thought that was one of the wisest things somebody could have come up with. Because it's not we anymore. We younger people, I told you it's been a while since I preached, right? So this might have been true 20 years ago. The strength of youth doesn't have the wisdom necessarily of those who have been there and done that. But the combination is a powerful combination. And I think of Emma every once in a while. She's gone to heaven now. But what a powerful, this little frail lady. And I swear that she couldn't hardly lift the teapot. She would, but she'd do it. But she spoke into my life. And I suppose in a way, I'm hoping that this morning, this is just a little bit of a snippet of one guy's life. Raised on the road, went into ministry. That all went away because I was a fool. I made some pretty unwise decisions, and it cost me everything. But God said, "I'll never leave you or forsake you." So while I'm running that way, he's got the fishing line out, and he's going, "Not so far there, Marky boy. I'll let you go that far, but you're coming back home soon." And that's kind of how it's been. So I'm just hoping that in a little way, I can be a bit of Emma to somebody this morning, out there or here, to just those two things. God's grace is greater than your failures, and you're gifted with something to do for the kingdom, and he wants you to do it. Trust him in that. He'll give you all the things, all the provisions you need to do the job. So that is what we call a testimony, I suppose. And we're going to close this morning with the song Love on the Line. And I hope that we can sing that with this kind of ringing, your own testimony maybe ringing in your ears a little bit. And so amen is how we finish these. Amen.